Disruption works. Disruption is justified. So says my guest this week, Roger Hallam, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion and the mastermind of Just Stop Oil. He joins me here on Political Thinking, an opportunity for a conversation with, not a news interrogation of, someone who shapes our political thinking about what has shaped theirs. Hallam argues, and I quote, that only mass civil resistance can stop the global 1% imposing mass death on billions of people. Agree with him or passionately disagree? There's no denying that he's one of the most potent organisers of political protests of recent times. Roger Hallam, thanks for joining me on Political Thinking.
Hi.
That quote came from your website. There's another quote on the front page. It says, "The essence of what is human is the ability to make a decision, a conscious decision about what is right in life." What did you mean?
Well, I thought we were going to talk about this later in the interview, but okay, we'll start with the big point. So the big point, I suppose, is that at a time of existential crisis, people have to and tend to make a decision about what's right and wrong, and they base their decision on that virtue, on the notion of virtues. They don't make a utilitarian decision. They don't go, what will work, what won't work. And I think our culture's in the process of transitioning towards a realization we don't have control. We have control over our own lives, we don't have control over what's going to happen over the next 30 years. And so what's most important is we live a good life. And that's broadly what I promote to people in terms of them making a decision to go into resistance.
Do you mean that what I spend my day job doing, asking questions of politicians about this or that policy initiative, in a sense misses the point as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, well, the danger of disrupting you. I'm just going to read you a quote. So hopefully your audience can understand a little bit more viscerally what we're actually talking about. So, I get sent science articles 3 or 4 times a day. So there's nothing particularly unique about this, but it came out about a month ago from a peer-reviewed paper in a journal called Energies. And this is what it says. If warming reaches or exceeds 2 degrees centigrade, mainly richer humans will be responsible for killing roughly 1 billion mainly poorer humans. Okay, so
and that's the result that climate change produces drought, produces famine, and so on and so forth.
No. What that quote is saying is climate change is not killing anyone. It's mainly richer human beings who are killing poorer human beings. And the tool of the Death Project is destruction of the climate.
Tool is an interesting word, and I quoted you as saying the global 1% are imposing mass death. You're arguing that this is a conscious, a deliberate, a calculated act by those people, are you, rather than the byproduct of what they would no doubt justify as growth, expansion of wealth, and so on?
It's an interesting intellectual digression.
But you think misses the point?
To split hairs over what degree of murder it is.
No, it's a genuine question because it's your language.
I'm just choosing my words carefully. I think when your audience hears that, you've got 2 options, which is to try and intellectualize around it. And, ask a reasonable intellectual question, which is to what degree is it murder, to what degree is it manslaughter? But that is a displacement activity. The main human response to that should be massively emotional. Emotional about what's going to happen to you, what's going to happen to your family, what's going to happen to the country, what's going to happen to the whole world. what's going to happen for the next 100,000 years, because this is going to go on and on. And the biggest problem is journalists like yourself, with all due respect, and a lot of elite people are incapable of emotionally connecting.
Do you think that emotional reaction, the thing you say I'm incapable of, but the interview's not about me, is what you did successfully produce a few years back in that very successful few days for you when Extinction Rebellion brought chaos to the streets of London, if you're a critic, or finally showed how many people were willing to stand up and be counted and to fight against climate change?
I disagree with what you just said. I think it is about you, and it's about the audience. So one of the things you learn about how to persuade people or how to create mobilization is about centering things on the actual moment, this moment, right? We have a moment here. I'm talking to you. You're talking to me. We have to learn to think about the immediacy of the moment rather than engage in what I would describe as the privilege of detachment.
Let's say I reacted in the way that is want the right word? You would want me to. And what you don't want me to do, and this isn't this interview, is to say, well, some scientists don't agree with that number and they don't agree with this timescale. We're not having that debate today. That's for another time and another place, because there are other views, as you know. What is it that you want the reaction to be of me or anybody else?
The very question of how do you want me to react, for me, shows that you simply haven't taken the information on. You know, if someone came through that door and said, your partner's in hospital, you wouldn't be saying, well, what sort of reaction do you want me to have to that? You'd be going, I've got to go, Roger. Bye. There's an emergency. You know, like 3 years ago, the British Parliament, as you know, 4 years ago, I think it was now, made a decision, right, on behalf of this country that we are in an emergency.
That was the wording that they used. Theresa May was Prime Minister. It came soon after Extinction Rebellion took to the streets.
No one in the political class, including yourself and your colleagues at the BBC, have even come close to understanding and acting upon what an emergency is. An emergency is when you clear the decks, right? What we should be talking about in this interview is not a nice gentlemanly discussion about my background and, you know, what I think about the theory of social change. If you have me on for a whole bunch of series, we can go into that. But I haven't been on the BBC for, 3 years now. I've got half an hour on your show. There's an emergency. What I want to talk about is you, because you have enormous...
Well, this is interesting. So you want to come onto an interview programme and interview me rather than the other way around.
Yes, because that's how social change works.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask you some questions and you can ask me some questions. Why don't we do a deal halfway?
Let me just finish. I'm not going to go on for ages. Let me just finish and say the process of social change, the process of getting things done in emergency is all about transgression. It's all about saying, what you're saying is not important. This is what's important. Sure. Because it's objectively important, because that's what an emergency is.
What you've just said, I think, raises quite a fundamental question, which is it fear, is it anger, is it what you called visceral emotion that will drive change, or is it hope? Now, only in the last few days we've seen the Prince of Wales talking about the importance of hope when it comes to climate change. And he would see himself, I think the King would see himself as somebody who's argued passionately for change. And my guess is privately they'd say, come on, Roger, I mean, if you scare the pants off people, that's not going to work at all. What do you say to people who say that?
I say that you are not being true to yourself if you engage in utilitarian distractions. When I helped to initiate Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, my fundamental rule is to say the truth and to act as if it's real. That was the foundation. And if you want my analysis on why Extinction Rebellion was so successful, it was because the founders were not interested in being successful. They were interested in telling the truth. That's a completely different logic.
Now, after you and your supporters occupied the streets, particularly of London in 2019, after 1,000 odd people got arrested, the UK government not only listened, they would no doubt deny there was a direct link to the declaration of a climate emergency, but they did declare a climate emergency in Parliament. Also, some of your representatives, not you, but got to meet with Michael Gove, who was then the Environment Secretary. Did it feel to you like a moment where, wow, these people are actually listening?
Well, this is a really mind-blowingly stupid question, right? 1 billion people.
We can swap if you like. You can do my job and I'll do yours.
With all due respect, right?
I love the addition of with all due respect.
It's a mind-blowingly.
That makes it feel a lot better.
I'll tell you why it's a mind-blowingly stupid question.
Yeah.
Is and this comes back to emotional connection, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've got no expectation of you emotionally connecting, right, with what I've just said, because you're part of that system that isn't able to connect. When I'm coming onto this program,
I'm paid not to take the side of people who are in front of me to be interviewed.
Yes,
That's what I'm paid for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're paid, but also it's part of the culture. The psychopathic culture of the British elite is just not to connect with the emotional reality of what's going to be imposed on the British people.
But did it feel that way then, or was there a moment you thought, not for a second, that you'd won? Of course not. But we're shifting things, we're moving things, things are changing.
Yes, there was a moment when the British establishment, the political class of this country, had the opportunity to fulfil its most grave obligations towards the British nation, the British people, and it utterly failed.
That was in 2019.
That was in 2019, when there was 10,000 people on the streets of London, and it was an opportunity, right? That was a very graceful, very well organised, very peaceful protest, as everyone knows.
If I gave you the whole half hour to simply repeat how many people are going to die and how awful it's going to be, is that going to work? Because you're someone who is interested in what ultimately will work. And there are plenty of people in the old Extinction Rebellion movement, outside the movement, go, it doesn't work. It alienates people. It turns them off. People want hope.
I'm not primarily motivated by what works, right? What I'm primarily motivated by is, in a fairly inadequate way, obviously because I'm human, is to live a good life so that when I'm on my deathbed, I feel like I had some integrity at a time when society was heading for the most catastrophic collapse in the human story.
Forgive me, that sounds, which I'm surprised by, genuinely, that sounds like you've almost given up. It's how do I live with myself before my maker? And your mother was a Methodist preacher, and it's clear that religion played quite an important part in shaping the person that you are in your youth. It sounds as if
it doesn't mean I've
given up.
It doesn't mean I've given up. It doesn't mean I haven't given up, right? It's just not thinking that question's important. I'm saying on the basis of understanding what it actually is, right, that it is an evil situation. In total seriousness, I'm not talking science fiction novels here. I'm talking about Hitler, the Holocaust. I'm talking about Cambodia. I'm talking about what happened in Congo. This is a beyond serious situation.
I've very deliberately not had an argument with you.
Yeah.
About the science or the numbers. But I am going to say, because I think it's right to say, there are plenty of people who will say it's nothing like the Holocaust. The Holocaust is the deliberate industrialized destruction of a people. And climate change, you think, is the responsibility of an elite. You slightly dodged the question when I said, was it deliberate? You sort of suggested it was a kind of verbal game. But it is not, therefore, the same as Pol Pot massacring people for who they are.
It's worse. And the reason it's worse is because of the scale, right?
Yeah, but motive matters.
Motive matters. Motive matters, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, right? What happened in the Holocaust was an obscenity beyond words because there was a direct motive to kill. But as you well know, right, and as any legal person would say, there's two elements to a crime, right? There's the scale of the crime and there's intentionality. And the intentionality is in the mid-ground, as it were. It's not like they didn't know, they don't have the information. They do know, and they do have the information, and they're prepared for people to die. But admittedly,
let's go back to what
just
people
a minute. Let's
do.
just deal with this issue, right?
Yeah.
But admittedly, no one's pretending that the elites want to kill the poor of this world just because they're poor.
I know my audience reasonably well. I think they're at the listening to this, watching. They're interested in what you're saying. They're saying, "What does Roger Hallam want
coming
me
on
to
to
do? Do you want them? And do you think this would make the difference to join the ranks of people?" Say in Just Stop Oil, for example, direct protest, whether it's kind of throwing things at paintings, whether it's lying down in the streets, is that what's going to bring about the change?
There's a fundamental decision, and then there's a degree of practicality with any fundamental decision, right? In the real world, there's a degree of practicality. The fundamental decision is to emotionally connect with the criminality of what is happening on the basis of what is said.
Yeah.
Therefore, you have no choice. You have no choice morally not to enter into resistance against the British government at this time. Resistance is a foreign notion to most people listening to this, no doubt. But it's not like impossible to get your head around. People resist all the time on different levels, right? What we're practically talking about here is mass civil disobedience in a UK context. And there's a pathway, which is Just Stop Oil. And dare I say it, people can go onto the website and it takes 2 minutes and you get into the system and they will tell you what you can and can't do and all the rest of it, right? The fundamental point is that in order to create the change that we need in the time that we've got, we have no choice other than to engage in mass civil disobedience.
But then there is a practical question, which I think is entirely fair to ask you, which is you got thousands onto the street in 2019. Since then, we're talking of small-scale resistance. And unless you get many more than the 10,000 you had before, it's not going to happen, is it, what you want to happen? Governments are not going to quake. They are not going to dramatically change their policies. So are you anywhere close to that?
We may be not. And the reason I'm saying that is not because I'm trying to avoid a question, right? It's very difficult to predict. Because
did you know before 2019? In other words, was there a moment you thought, my God, this is going to happen? I mean, we are now not getting just a few.
Yeah, I said to Extinction Rebellion, if tens of thousands of people go to London, there will be a result, right? That was my prediction on the basis of the study that I'd had. But one of the things about being in this work, as it were, is that you never can predict whether those people tip over to saying, I'm going to have to act because I cannot not act, right? And they may not. And if they do, then we've got a chance of saving what's left to save. And if we don't, then we're heading into this mass starvation scenario.
It often takes something very immediate, very personal to tip people into action. Now, in your case, it was as a farmer, seeing what the climate was doing to your farm.
I think actually it's not that much about what's actually happened to you for most people. I think for most people...
But humour me by answering one question, just for the sheer hell of it, we could do that. Your farm failed, and it was one of the things that made you think there's something I need to now do something about.
Yes, there's hundreds of millions of farmers around the world who've had the same experience as me, which is the trauma, and it is a trauma, of finding out that the weather systems are not going to enable them to grow the crops they wanted to grow. Like, it's a financial disaster for them, but it's also an emotional disaster because they lose control of their lives. You know, you've got a nice, calm sort of life, dare I say. You know, you don't have to worry whether this studio exists every time you come into work.
That is true.
If you're a farmer, you can be the best farmer in the world, but if it rains every day for 7 weeks, 100% of your crops are going to die. You know, if it's minus 20 in the winter, you're going to lose all your winter crops. The fact that it's a 1 in 1,000 year event is no solace to you. You're losing your livelihood.
But did that feel to you when that happened to you on your farm like a moment?
It was a moment of making real what is going to happen.
So something you knew intellectually, but seeing...
Exactly. This is the problem, right? And this is why civil resistance works, because we can have as nice a chat as we like, and, you know, I can do lots of interviews. Nothing's going to change. What's going to change is the emotion of finding people getting dragged off the street, put into prison on a mass scale. What I'm saying to you and your audience is get real, right? This is not the time to look for comfort. It's the time to actually understand how totally terrible this situation is and to act accordingly. And what we need to do is in November is go down to London and engage in civil disobedience, because that's our best bet. No one's pretending it's going to be successful. No one's pretending that just stop oil is necessarily the best thing ever, right? But that's the opportunity your viewers have. And it's the opportunity, dare I say it, for you and also all these people, right?
What, the ones behind the glass who are
yes,
pressing the buttons
it's
and
the
my
opportunity.
producers?
No, don't smile about this. It's very serious. What I want to say to your audiences is your reaction over the last 2 minutes is symptomatic of why they're being betrayed. Like you're belittling of your responsibility and these people to actually make a concrete step to save our country. And you will suffer the consequences of it in the next decade. You will be taken to court. You will be taken to court. You will be, as a member of the British establishment.
All right.
Right? You need to take this seriously.
I'm going to be taken to court for what?
You absolutely will be taken to court as a member of the British establishment for betraying the British people during the 2020s.
Yeah.
Right?
But
You need to think
what would
about
I be guilty of?
You will be guilty of treason.
Over the course of this conversation, you've told me how frightening it is, what's going to happen. You've got to address, I think, don't you, the people who just say, I don't want to be hectored and harangued and terrified. I want to be persuaded by cogent argument about what will change and how it will change and what will make a difference. To those who think that, are you just thinking they're missing the point?
Yes.
But they're your audience.
No. The audience is the 1% of the population. Civil resistance and social change happens when 1% of the population decides that they have been morally violated to the point that they engage in resistance.
Now, does it matter, therefore, that 6 in 10, even people who protested, said disruptive protesting hinders rather than helps the cause? Does that matter?
No. For the reasons I've just said.
So, in a way, to hell with them. So long as you stirred one person out of 100 on this programme,
no, you're totally
succeeded.
misrepresenting what I'm saying. It's not a strategy. It's not like, oh, those people don't matter because we're just going for that 1%, right? We're not going for anything. We're making a statement, right? We're making a statement to eternity about the sort of people we are. That's a completely different universe, right, of mental activity. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I do.
I'm trying to say there's something totally unacceptable about the situation we're in.
No, I do understand it. I just want to end on this, if we may, because I hear I think it's anger, isn't it? Is it fair to describe it as anger? It's not frustration.
I'm utterly infuriated.
Yes. And I'm aware that occasionally, because we're having a civilised conversation, I've smiled and you find it annoying.
Of course I find you annoying.
That's
I find everything about the British establishment disgusting. The point is, Nick, is what are you going to do to have integrity in your life, right?
Yeah, well,
what are these people going to do
I
to
will
have
reflect on how I have
life?
integrity in my life, if you forgive me, not with a complete stranger I've only just met. I'm paid to ask you questions.
You've had 30 years, right?
Yeah.
You and your generation have had 30 years to look at this information. And what you've chosen to do is have a quiet life, right? And hell's coming down the road because you didn't act in time, right? It's not my job as a farmer to do this. It's the political establishment's job. You've got lots of privilege. You earn lots of money. I don't have a problem with that, right? There's a nice guy in there. What are you all doing? There's another world out there, which is a world of acting upon your fundamental beliefs. When you act upon your fundamental beliefs, you experience a certain ecstasy. Many, not all, and not all times, when people are put into a cell in a police station, they have a sense of peace, a profound sense of peace. This is a spiritual phenomenon, which is when people stand up against evil, there's a release. There's not a tension anymore. There's not that violation of your core self. And when you go into resistance, you suddenly feel like you've rediscovered your integrity. You've rediscovered the essence of what you think you are. You return to yourself, right? This is a universal phenomenon when people stand against evil historically. And that's what I'm saying to your audience, is this is not like an accounting cost-benefit analysis, right? It's an invitation to be who you already are, right? It's an invitation to come back to what you already are, which is a fundamentally decent person.
Roger Hallam, thank you for joining me on Political Thinking. Well, that was a challenge to my political thinking. I wasn't sure whether he was interviewing me or I was interviewing him. What is clear is that Roger Hallam doesn't think he needs to quietly persuade, doesn't think he needs to coax. He doesn't want to use any of the tools of normal political campaigning. He believes he has to shock, he has to engage the soul in the hope that you, or at least some of you watching, join him in mass civil disobedience. Thanks for watching.